Come on in. See, I'm usually by nature a pessimist, so I assume no one's going to come. So I only make a few copies, but I'm gonna have to make some more. No, maybe we'll share it. So I was just asking the question of, obviously Tisha B'av is a day of mournfulness and sadness. Do you personally have any other sense about Tisha B'av other than devastation and mourning and hunger? Anybody like Tisha B'av? Anybody?
Here there's nothing like unity and going to like Jewish history.
Yeah. I guess you could have it on Pesach too.
We don't talk about the Middle Ages.
Okay, right. It's much longer. That's interesting. In that sense, it's very real, especially once you get down to the Holocaust, or Pittsburgh. I don't know. You could.
I think that's maybe a little bit to do with what you were talking about earlier today, that we really, for somebody who is speaking, that we really don't have an idea, concept of what life was like during both the big
Yeah. So I'm basically I want to look at some things to sort of make the argument that there's actually a whole other side to Tisha B'av. Now, it's interesting. On Tisha B'av, of course, there are certain sad prayers, several, that we don't say on Tisha B'av, right? We don't say Tachnon. We didn't say Lam Natseach, which we usually say. We don't say, there's about 6 or 7 things. We don't say Tzidkascha, which is a kind of sad prayer on Shabbat at Mincha yesterday. And all of that is because of Tisha B'av. And it's because the Gemara says, Kara Elai Moed. It's called a holiday. Now, the pshat of that is that Moed means a time, but Moed also means a holiday. There seems to be, and of course, we have a tradition that these days are going to become days of feasting, days of joy, right? That it's precisely the sad days that will become joyous days. So let me hand this out. I have to share. I'm going to use this, and I will use a computer to share it with people at home. Share my screen. Right, this also is a mourning. Rabbi Soloveitchik very famously made the distinction between personal mourning and historic mourning. Right, this is historic mourning. Personal mourning is one in which there's a shock, there's loss. You don't have to encourage a person to mourn their loved one. They, by definition, mourn their loved one. But when it comes to this kind of mourning, there's a process that we have to enter into. And so it's not that we're trying to move on from this mourning, There's a story that J.J. Shafter wrote, and it's of these young people. Their grandfather gets up at midnight every night, and he mourns, and he puts ashes on his head, and he sits down on the floor, and the kids are just beside themselves. They go to the psychiatrist, and they describe this. And the psychiatrist says, well, what's the patient's, presenting issue? And they say, well, he lost his temple. And the psychiatrist said, oh, this sounds, very, this really sounds like schizophrenia. You better bring him in. So when did you have this loss? 1900 years ago. Well, and what, and the kids just want him to move on, and he just can't seem to ever move on. And so it plays all out, but then at the end, he says, the psychiatrist concludes that had he only lost his temple once, we would expect him to move on. But because in early days, he lost his temple and got it back, he has an expectation that he'll get it back. So he just can't he can't seem to go through the natural process of grief and resolution, because he expects. Now, when we lose a loved one, we don't expect to have a loved one back. We on some level, but this kind of communal mourning, this kind of national mourning, there's another side, there's another aspect, right? This is about loss, but it's also about redemption. on some level, right? And everybody knows the idea that the Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'av, that the seeds of redemption always lie in the ashes of destruction, right? And that, I think, is very fundamental to Tisha B'av. So you can see on the page here, obviously the quote from Zechariah that it's precisely these days that will be transformed, these 4 fast days which commemorate destruction, which will be transformed into days of feasting. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that this quote from Zechariah actually has a halachic repercussion. That Rav Chanan Bar Yosef said in Rav Shimon Chisda, it says these 4 fast days, it says in the book of Zechariah, are called fast days, but that Zechariah says they will one day be called days of feasting. So the Gemara says, how do we understand that halachically? And the Gemara says, if bisman sheyesh shalom, if there's peace for the Jewish people, so then you l'sasan l'simcha, then these days should be days of joy and feasting. But ein shalom, if there's no peace for the Jewish people, then tzom, then we should fast. That's what the Gemara says. So Rav Papa says, if there's shalom, these are days of joy. If there's destruction, there should be fasting. But what if there's neither? What if it's neutral? What if there's really peace for the Jewish people? Like today, there's some anti-Semitism, but it's not destruction. It's not a time of destruction of Jewish people. So then what do you do? So he says, Rotzu misanin, Rotzu ein misanin. If you want, you could fast. If you don't want to fast, don't fast. That's what he says, because it's neither here nor there. So Gemara says, what about Tisha B'av? Is that going to have the same law, that it's going to be dependent on our experience? In other words, what does the Gemara even mean here? Why should it be dependent on our experience? Why wouldn't you fast on all these fast days? I mean, even if you're not at a time of freedom, you still have Pesach. So somehow these 4 fast days are not just about the past, right? They really are about, if there's redemption, if it's a time that's getting closer to redemption, then you don't fast, then you have simcha, then you have joy. But these 4 fast days are from the very beginning contingent, right? Pesach's not a time, it's a time of freedom. That's just what it is. But these 4 fast days are not inherently days of fasting and sadness and mourning. That's not an inherent part of Judaism. The hope is that those will be transformed. In other words, these are always contingent these days. We're always waiting for these days to change. That's not true of all the other holidays. So the Gemara says, no, Tisha B'av is different because both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'av. So therefore, Tisha B'av, we don't give you the option for Tisha B'av. And Tisha B'av is always going to be a time. In other words, I guess the Gemara feels that no matter, even if there's peace right now, there isn't always going to be peace for the Jewish people. And Tisha B'av represents, because that was the day of destruction. So as long as there isn't a new temple, you have to have Tisha B'av. It's an interesting question whether during the Second Temple period did they have Tisha B'av. What was it? Was Tisha B'av a holiday? Was it not a holiday? Was it a time of feasting? So there's machlokas about this. But I mentioned this morning that Rabbi Soloveitchik said that actually there was prayer, there was kinos, and it was because there was a feeling that nothing was so secure, that Jewish people, until there's really a messianic era, there's never a total sense of security. There's a psalm, Mizmor Asaf, and it's Psalm number 79. And this is a psalm that's often connected to Tisha B'av. And some of the kinos are kind of based on it. So it's Mizmar Asaf, Elohim ba'u goyim b'nachalatecha. God, the nations have entered your place of inheritance. Tiamu etecha kodshecha. They have made impure your holy temple. As somewhat Yerushalayim le'iyim, they have left Jerusalem in ruins. And all these terrible things. They've left the human beings as food for the fowl. Blood was shed like water in Jerusalem. And Shifchi kamayim siyos Yerushalayim bein kover. Leinu cherpa l'shchineinu la'agvel kelsu. Ad mosai Hashem ta'anef l'netzach. Until when, God, will you be angry? Is that going to be forever? Tivar kamo eish kanatecha, that like a fire, your jealousy is burning. In other words, this is really the first kinna. This is the first time that a human being structures a prayer which says, Ad Masa, God, how are you, how can this still go on? Pour out your wrath not upon us, but upon the nations. And we know this well. Yaakov as Nebe, we know from the Seder. And then Lamu Yamru Hagayim Ayelohem. Why should the non-Jews say, where is their God? Right? This is very much reminiscent of Moshe. It's a Chilul Hashem. It's a desecration of God's name. Something bad happens to the Jewish people. So the Medrash of Eicha, a little bit further down, says the following. If you have this parak of Tehillim, that's like a kina, that's like a lamentation. So why do you begin with Mizmar LaAsaf, a song to Asaf, whoever Asaf is? It should be Kina LaAsaf, a lamentation to Asaf. So the Gemara says, Mashal HaMelech she'aseh beis chuppah leveno, v'sidei v'kira v'tzirei. It's like the parable of a king who built a chuppah for his son, and he had it all decorated. And then the son went off and left and led a bad life. And so the king went to the chuppah, and he broke the wood that was holding it up, and he tore the cloth, and he broke it all apart. And then the prince's tutor began to play a song, and the king said, and they said to the prince's tutor, the king just tore up the chuppah, and the son is gone, and there's this distance between the king and his son, and you're singing a song. So I'm like, the king is the king. He could have sent out messenger of his son off, and he didn't, right? They punch the wall. Why are they punching the wall? Because they want to punch their son. That's why. So that's the idea. Kachamro le'asaf. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hecharit heicho u'mikdash v'atayoshev u'mizamar. So too, the rabbis say, you can say to Asaf, who composed this mizmar, what do you mean it's a mizmar? How could it be a song? It's about the destruction. So he said the same thing. God has poured out his wrath upon the Eitzim V'Avanim, upon and not a. So that's why the afternoon of Tisha B'av, even though it's more extreme because the temple's burning, we say Nachem, but we sit on chairs and you can go to work and there's things you can do that you couldn't do in the morning because once they saw the temple burning, they said, oh, okay, the Jewish people are going to survive. And so there's a sense of, I guess that's not really joy. I guess there's a sense of relief. I don't know if that's really relief. Maybe that's hope. I guess there's a sense of hope and promise. And I think, it's true for me. I think part of Tisha B'av, the extreme mourning of Tisha B'av, the sense of God is so absent. Where are you, God? How could you have done this? Like all of that bears out incredible intimacy, I think, between God and the Jewish people. It's like a parent and child. If there's anger between them, so they're engaged with each other, there's another option, which is, one could be dead to the other. And, it could be, they torcrea, whatever it is. So it's funny. And in a way, like you would think that, Yom Kippur is a much more intimate time with God, or Shabbos, or Purim, or Simchas Torah. But in a funny way, I find that the passion of Tisha B'av is so much stronger than, Simchas Torah it's a party, but I don't feel like, God is as present in Simchas Torah as in Tisha B'av. There's a presence because of the absence that I find palpable in Tisha B'av. And so I was saying that, I just said to my wife, I said, Tisha B'av is my favorite holiday. She said, it's hard to believe we're even married. Like, you're a nut. So, but it's that's what it is. Like, there's something just so palpable and powerful and emotive about Tisha B'av that I mean, Yom Kippur's a little bit like that, I guess. Yom Kippur's, you get that in Yom Kippur without the mourning, but with the sort of yearning for the divine. But I don't know if it's as emotional, really. Now, there's Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara says, and this is a Gemara I haven't really figured out, but I think it has something to do with what we're talking about. So it refers to this psalm. The Gemara here is talking about Kibbut Abayim. The Gemara in Kedushin, they're talking about what are the obligations of a child to parents, parents to child. And the Gemara just tells a couple of stories about Kibbut Abayim, about honoring your father and mother, and how important it is to honor your father and mother. And here it says, Yom Echad Amalei Ashkein Mayim. One day Rabbi Abahu said to Avimi, his son, bring me some water. And so he brought some water, but the father, Rabbi Abahu, fell asleep. So Avimi bent over him and waited for his father to wake up. And the Gemara says that it was so somehow profound, the reward was so great for Avimi that Darash Avimi Mizmar La'asaf, that the result of honoring his father to such an extreme gave him the merit, the spiritual merit, that he was able to darshan, he was able to expound upon Mizmar La'asaf, this kapitel Tehillim, which is the kapitel that we just read about the destruction. So I saw this Gemara for the first time today when I was thinking about this class, and it's very strange. I mean, obviously, I got to this Gemara because I was looking at commentaries on Mizmar La'asaf, and this Gemara pops up, and of course the question is, it seems bizarre. What does one thing have to do with the other? I mean, how does honoring your father and mother give you the merit? First of all, is it so hard to darshan Mizmar La'asaf? I mean, it's a lament, it's about the destruction, and God, where are you? So what does the Gemara mean that he merited by, honoring his father so much? He was bent over him with the water, hoping he's going to wake up. And when he wakes up, boom, there's the water, right? Now that is a bit of a schlep, you got to stand there with the water. Maybe a chair, I don't know. But actually what the Gemara says, it sounds like koi alei. It's an interesting thing, right? In other words, the father falls asleep and the son, koi alei, he's over him, the Gemara says, holding the water. Like, and the image is this. So that's funny. Like, why didn't it just say he hamtin le? He waited for him. The Gemara could have said he waited for him and then he brought him the water. It doesn't say. It says he was like poised over him. So that's interesting, right? That's obviously a very high level of kibbut abayim. But what's your sense of that? Why didn't the Gemara just say? Why didn't he just sit and wait? I'm ready to yeah, well.
I just want to do the son in that story has two options, right? You can go fetch the water, times is an ordeal. You go fetch the water and come back, find out that the thing his father happened for, his father just didn't care enough so they can stay awake for it. He asked the son to do this whole thing and to go on this whole ordeal.
Right.
The father didn't bother, and they didn't even want it that bad. And that's kind of one option. And how the son could have taken it to think it in the opposite way and said, wow, he must really need to sleep, but when he wakes up, his kid's still going to be thirsty. And that kind of, when we talked about the Mizmor La'asaf, very similar. You're singing while the king is destroying the canopy. No, you're finding the silver lining. No, like I'm glad that there's that. I'm looking to this in a positive light. I'm thinking that the king had this anger and needed to get it out of him, and he did it in a way that was not.
In the comparison being that the father still wants the water.
Yeah, and
The king is still engaged with the son.
Yeah.
Over here, the father's still engaged.
Yeah.
He hasn't totally fallen asleep.
Yeah.
sort of God falling asleep, right? We have that
Exactly.
metaphor in
Yeah. And the
Tanakh.
king and the dad and God, they're all like the same. They're
Sure.
all similar in the story.
Right. That's good. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think that's why it says, like stood over him.
Mm,
Not just that he brought the water and he waited for that, like that he was anxiously anticipating the return of his dad.
yeah.
You think of that in terms of
Yeah.
the return of
Mm,
the temple and
Sure.
he merited being able to explain the psalm because he felt it on an emotional level or something else that no one had, no one did.
mm,
It wasn't so much that the act was so important, but the feeling was so powerful that it
mm.
helped
He
him
really
relate
wants
with-
the love of his father, or really wants to
or he
connect with his
really
father.
wants to help to
Serve his
father.
father.
Yeah.
Right. Does he really, because to fulfill the mitzvah, it would have been enough just to wait for his father to wake up, ask for more water, bring him water, or to leave the water there, or to, right? It's for him, it's much more than the mitzvah. It's the relationship. It's even much more than the relationship, because the relationship would have been intact. It's like, it's this anticipation, right, of that moment, right? He doesn't want to lose a moment of that depth, right? Who would you do this for? I mean, you'd only do this for somebody who's gonna, who you really needed their favor, either you wanted something from them, or I don't know, like this is very extreme. You're poised, you're ready for the father to wake up. Right. And I think it is sort of that metaphor of God waking up. We have that metaphor. In fact, we have it in Kinnos. Lama Tishan. Why are you sleeping, God? We have that language in the Kinnos. So I think you're right. I think you're both right. I think that's got to be what it is, because or else it's just so bizarre that the Gemara throws in Mizmar Las. I mean, what one thing have to do with the other, right? But so it's clearly God as parent, right? And that's the other side of Tisha B'av. If God is a parent is the one relationship that doesn't matter what your child does to you. A parent who beats a child, I don't think has to necessarily love the child, the parent. Now you have parents who abuse children, and abuse is very bad. And I don't think the child necessarily loves the parent. And human beings marry each other, get divorced all the time. The one relationship that sort of never leaves is the parent for the child. The child could really do anything, toward the parent, totally reject the parent, beat the parent. On some level, parental love is different, I think, than other loves. And you'll all discover that soon. And the stuff people do for children, right? They are willing in a moment to sacrifice everything, their whole life, their very life for their child. It's not very explicable, really, logically, but that's just the way it is. Even if their child rejects them, it doesn't matter. And so this idea of God as parent, I think also, places within Tisha B'av the presence that is the result of the absence, or the presence that is so obvious in the face of the absence. And this is a Gemara in Makos, well-known Gemara that about Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva really had a sense of this. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lazar, Ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, they were all walking on the road just after the destruction. And they heard the sound of the Roman armies. And it was 120 miles away. And they began to cry. Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. And they said to him, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Why are you crying?" And they said, these are heathens who bow to stones, and they are going to they're going to destroy the footstool of our God. The temple is burnt. How can we not? So he said, "Therefore I'm laughing. If God treats idolaters this way, right? God is everybody's parent. If God treats the idolaters this way, that mala over ritzono kachla ose ritzono come. So if the ones who violate God's will and destroy the temple, God lets them have a big party, for victory. How much more so for those who follow God's will? It's really turns the whole thing on its head. I mean, it's really kind of wild. First of all, to be laughing, whether it's true or not, again, like as we said about Agadata in the past, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be literally true. It's more powerful if it's not, because Chazal are telling it in a certain way. they want to tell it in the way that they're telling it to teach us something. So why do Chazal tell the story this way? Right, God in a sense, I think, is everybody's parent. And for Rabbi Akiva really, I mean, is it just, I think the question to keep in mind is Rabbi Akiva just kind of looking on the bright side, or is there something more to this? And let's see the next story. Another time they went to Jerusalem. When they got to Mount Scopus, which is the first place that you see the Har HaBayit, it's still true today, so they tore their clothes because the temple was destroyed. And there's a halacha like that. When I was a kid, and I didn't grow up so much as a Zionist, grew up religious, but I was a Zionist. So when we would go to the schools that I went to Israel with, when I was like in high school, you tore your clothes when you went to the wall. Not everyone does that today, but at the time of the Gemara, they did. Shigila Arbayas wrote Shul Shiatzim Beis Kodesh, and the rabbis saw foxes running around on the Temple Mount. I guess there was nothing built in the place of the temple yet. Rabbi Akiva mitzachek, and they were crying, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. And they said to him, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Why are you crying?" And they said, "We're crying because this is the fulfillment of what it says in Bamidbar and the curses that it says in Bamidbar, Azar Hakarev Yumat, that even a regular Jew is not allowed to go into the Holy of Holies if you're not a Kohen. And the foxes are running around. Everything is hefker. That's why I am laughing," he said, because there is a connection between the prophecy of Uriah and Zechariah. And Uriah prophesied during the first temple and Zechariah during the second temple. And in Uriah it says that Zion will be a field plowed under. And in Zechariah it says about the redemption, that the elderly will sit in Jerusalem and they will have joy. And when the prophecy of Uriah had not come true, I wasn't sure if the prophecy of Zechariah would come true, but now that the destruction has come true, I know that because these two prophecies are tied together, therefore the prophecy of Zechariah, that these days are going to be changed into days of feasting and joy, that is going to happen. And they said, Akiva nechamtana, Akiva nechamtana. Akiva, you have comforted us. So the question I want to ask is, what is this? In other words, what is this about? What's he seeing? Is he just kind of looking on the bright side? Is he just, it's a bizarre reaction to laugh in the middle of, if you did that today, this morning, while people are crying, you're laughing. We'd think you're, crazy. You're not here. So what is it about Rabbi Akiva? Is he just looking on the bright side? Is he just trying to find hope? Or does he see in his laughter? What is that about? So I want to look at another Gemara about Rabbi Akiva, also well-known Gemara about his death, and ask the question of, is there anything we can learn from this Gemara to understand his approach to the previous Gemara? So this is about the Kinnah that we read this morning, about the 10 martyrs. And they put Rabbi Akiva in prison for studying Torah. And Pappos, who was a Greek who was with him, and he said to Rabbi Akiva, happy is to you that you've been put into prison for studying Torah, and woe is to me because I'm sorry, I guess Pappos is just he's just a guy who's in prison for doing bad things, and he's with Rabbi Akiva in prison. You can imagine this is probably how it was. Not long ago. There were Hasidic rabbis who were put into prison for being Hasidim, because people reported against them to the government, and they were in prison. They're probably in prison with other thugs, and what were the interactions like? So that's what it is over here for Rabbi Akiva. And so this guy Papa says to Rabbi Akiva, happy as you, you're not in for shoplifting like me. You're in because you did something so great, because you studied Torah. So they take Rabbi Akiva out to kill him. And as we know, they flayed his skin, and it was the time of the Shema. And he took upon himself the yoke of heaven at that moment when they were killing him. And he said the Shema. And his rabbi and his student said to him, Ad Khan, is this how far it goes? that even though, what are his students saying? What are they saying? What do they mean, ad kan? And this far? In other words, I guess, did the students expect him to not receive the oak of heaven? Did the students expect him to give up his faith? Is that what they expected at this moment? Right? It is the question of theodicy, right? In other words, if imagine the Holocaust, right? So one rational response would be to give up one's faith, to say there obviously is no God, because if there's a God and God is just, then none of this fits. So Rabbi Kiva said as follows: he said, I always read the verse in the Shema, you should serve God with your whole soul. And I had pain because of that. And I understood it to mean, even if God takes your soul from you, even if you die on account of God, you have to serve God with that. So I said, when will that come? And I will fulfill it. And now that it's come to my hand, should I not fulfill it? Says that's why I'm saying the Shema. Now, this is an avodas Hashem for him. He's serving God. And he extended the word echad, and he died with that. And they said, happy are you, Akiva, that your soul left with the word echad. The angels say to God, Zu Torah v'zu schar, this is the Torah and this is its reward. And the angels too are bothered by the question of theodicy, by justice. So Amalahem, Yot Sabaskal Vamra Ashrecha B'kiva Shatam Zam Chayam Abba. That happy are you, Akiva, that your share is in the world to come. There are other versions of this, like in the story of the 10 martyrs on Yom Kippur, in which the response is, you can't know. This is how it is before me, this is what I'm doing, and it cannot be understood. That theodicy, that why bad things happen to good people cannot be understood. God's justice cannot be understood. That's sometimes the answer. Here it's more, Rabbi Kiva has a share in the world to come. So I'm wondering, is there anything, and from this you get a little sense of Rabbi Akiva's personality in the face of tragedy. And does this tell us anything? I'm not sure the answer to this. This tells anything. Does this shed any light about, on why he's so different than all the other rabbis on the Temple Mount when they're crying? Okay. What's your sense? Is there something about him that? Yeah.
Even inside, you see that has its purpose. What God wants.
Oh, okay.
Beyond,
He sees religious value in tragedy.
what he sees, like, this might be bad, but this leads to something better, and ultimately he thinks everything has purpose. So he doesn't, even when something's really sad, he's like, oh, this is happening, so there's something greater than.
Oh, I see. In other words, even while they're killing him, he says, "Oh well, this is my opportunity. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for. Of course I'm happy. This is the mitzvah,
Yeah.
and I've been waiting for this." You mean so? It's the same thing. He always
It's not
sees.
physical.
Right. You're saying so in the story of the foxes, he sees the redemption in that. He sees future redemption in that destruction. And over here too, he sees mitzvah in destruction, right? He's not going to get to do any other mitzvahs. This is going to be it. But he does get to do one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, thoughts? Yeah.
There's some semblance of relief and the clarity in your life. You know what's up, what's down. You know what's right, what's wrong. And the times where we're seeing a kid rather be joyous in times of darkness is when he very clearly sees the light. So they see the prophecy coming true, and therefore I know I'm really a moment of clarity in my life where I see the future. Here too, I see what needs to be done, and I see, we God know what I thought, right? Like, listen, with unity and self, and he can see his role, very clear. And so, and kind of like the Gator says, like he almost, if he knows he's dying, he knows what's happening, and that provides some relief. Because it's one thing to die, and it's to die in darkness. die of certain
Mm.
but, not knowing what's happening or not knowing why or the cause.
Yeah. Oh, in other words, right. As if you really believe in God, like Rabbi Akiva, you really see this as part of the process. Right. So you're not dying in doubt.
Yeah.
You're not dying for nothing. You're dying for something big. Right. For him, it's this opportunity to do a mitzvah. It's wild. I mean, many of our ancestors who died al Kiddush Hashem, they died singing on Imam, and I think they did die with that sense of this is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah of
And this is
Kiddush
not
Hashem. Yes, that's true. That's true. But he didn't have a choice. I assume if he could choose to live, he would have. He certainly would not have, done this to himself just to get the mitzvah. As you know, so the temple is the idea that if you really believe in God, and you really, so the dark, and there's clarity, so of course the darkness is for light, because there's a God. Like, what other plan would there be? That's interesting. That's true faith, really. Everything in a certain sense becomes meaningful and about life. It's very good. All right. So I want to look, before I look at this story of the Rishner, I just want to look at this Nesiva Shalom here. It's on the last page. And it's a really wild piece. This is a son of Rebbe. He died, I think, about 30 years ago. His students, there's a big Beit Midrash, a big synagogue of his in Meishar, where it's my other than Kesher Israel, it's my favorite place to daven. I've only davened there twice, but I'm always very inspired there. I don't know why, but the Bikesh Rebbe Lakor Tisha B'av Shchol B'Shabbos. So I think I mentioned this on Friday night, that Rebbe wanted to get rid of, the Gemara says Rebbe wanted to get rid of Tisha B'av when it fell on Shabbos. Now it's a situation like this year, there's an argument between Rebbe and the sages. Rebbe said when it falls out like it did this year and gets pushed aside, just get rid of Tisha B'av for that year. Don't fast at all on Sunday. So obviously we don't hold like Rebbe, or we wouldn't be here right now. And the Chachamim disagreed with him. And so he quotes the Avodas Yisrael that he says that it doesn't mean Rebbe wanted to get rid of Tisha B'av. It means he wanted la'akor la'soto ikar. He wanted to do just the opposite. He wanted to make it the main thing, that the main moment of Judaism is when Tisha B'av is pushed off because of Shabbos. This is only Chassidim could do this. The Tisha B'av shechal b'Shabbos ikar ikarim. Because Tisha B'av falls on Shabbos, that's the main thing. More than any other holiday or many other time of joy. Bizman kazesh al Tisha B'av she'Yisrael him b'tachlis amrirus. Because Tisha B'av is our moment of deepest bitterness, and nevertheless, right? This past Shabbos, yesterday, we fulfilled the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, even though it was Tisha B'av. So we were right. This was our moment of tragedy, our moment of greatest pain and sadness, and we successfully stirred ourselves because God wanted us to have joy on Shabbos. It may be probably harder for him than us. That is the greatest nachas ruach. That's the greatest pleasure to God when the Jewish people, even though it's Tisha B'av, they have great joy as if it's Shabbos, because it is Shabbos. It's talking about when it falls on Shabbos. And no other holiday, has that value like when you celebrate Shabbos on Tisha B'av, because you brought yourself, because that's what God wants, and because Judaism is about joy. Masher says, when we strengthen ourselves at a time of sadness, and darkness, and we trust, we trust in God, that nobody will be left aside, that God is our parent, that God loves us, that God does not forsake us. That's what Tisha B'av and Shabbos represents. That at the moment of God's absence, what do we see? Presence. That's Tisha B'av. That's Shabbos Tisha B'av. It is the greatest faith in God, because at that moment of Shabbos Tisha B'av, what we are basically saying is we're celebrating Tisha B'av in a happy way, because we know God is the great Redeemer. God is the parent. And that is there for the good. We can't do it on every Tisha B'av because the Messiah's not here yet, because we have to mourn on Tisha B'av. But when Tisha B'av falls on Shabbos, we can do it. So for him, right, that's the hidden joy in Tisha B'av, is that Tisha B'av is all about hope. Tisha B'av is all about it becoming the opposite, right? Tisha B'av holds within itself the days of greatest joy, according to Zechariah. These are the days this is the day that's going to be transformed into joy, Tisha B'av, precisely because it is Tisha B'av, because when there's distance, when there's absence, when we miss God, to be reunited, and that's what Tisha B'av holds for us, is of course the greatest joy. I'll just read a little bit more of it. So he says that in Avelut, there is two aspects. I mentioned this on Shabbos also, that there's the aspect of mourning, but there's also the aspect of yearning. And it's when it's Shabbos Tisha B'av that those can really come together. Usually we have Tisha B'av, which is sadness because the Shekhinah is gone, the temple's gone. But with that comes also a yearning. I compared it to Tu B'Av on Shabbos, but he's saying you have it in Tisha B'av itself, right? And there's a sense that we yearn for God, and so for that to come true on Shabbos Tisha B'av, that is really the complete Tisha B'av. When you have both of those sense of mourning, sense that there's loss, but it's loss because we desire God, we yearn for God. That's really what we want. So that is what brings the rebuilding of the temple. It's not mourning that brings the rebuilding of the temple. It's the yearning that emerges out of the mourning, because our loved one is not gone, right? There's going to be redemption. That's why communal mourning contains within it the seeds of joy, and maybe not just the seeds of joy, but joy itself. And he says, this is what it means, the Gemara, anybody who mourns over Jerusalem will merit to see the joy of its roev zocha v'roev b'simchas, will merit to see its joy. Shizui avelis me'olam habinyan shali de zocha v'roev b'vinyana. She says you will merit to see its joy if you mourn for it, because the mourning for it is the rebuilding. That yearning is the rebuilding. That's what it means. And so Tisha B'av really isn't about commemorating the past. It's really about the future. That's what they say. I'll just read you this funny story from the Rishner. It's quoted a lot of places, that the Chassidim did not want to be sad. In fact, I'm teaching here in my class, and a couple of people here in my class teach a class every morning on Zoom at 8:30. And for about a year and a half, we've been learning tshuvot from the 19th century about different issues. Spent about 3/4 of the year on, spent probably half a year on the reform movement, looking at pro and con, early 18th, very early, and the early one of the major criticisms of Chassidim is that they're too happy, and that even when they sin, they're still happy, and they dance, and they yell out during davening in Yiddish, and they do handstands during davening. These were major criticisms of Chassidim that led to excommunication, public beatings. And this is not so. What I mean, that falls off after a while, and what you get is more Kabbalistic issues and other things and fear. But one of the things, what you see in a tshuva, what you see in a criticism of somebody, tells you something about how the world saw them. So the world, that was something unique, and it's when we think about the Chassidim as people who had joy, that obviously was true. But I sometimes wondered, is that just, a Shalom Aleichem thing, or we're just sort of projecting that back on the Hasidim? No, it turns out that at the very beginning of Hasidim, one of the big criticisms was their joy. And they really had a lot of joy. And that's a certain avoda, it's a certain way of doing Judaism. There are other ways of doing Judaism. There are ascetic paths of Judaism, the early pietists of Ashkenaz. There was Lithuanian Judaism at that time, which was focused only on Talmud study, and there was no there was no preaching that, even in your sin, you could, out of that, you could find joy and find God. And, but so the Chassidim really did have that joy. And obviously, I think today it's a little hard for us to relate to it because we've all been colored in the palette of Chassidut. We live, just like we're all Maimonideans, or we're all, in a certain sense, Chassidim. So it's like obvious to us that joy is a good thing. So Chassidim would engage all of their practical jokes on the 9th of Av because they didn't like the 9th of Av. And they would throw things at each other. And they decided what they would do in Rishon is they had a skylight. So they went to the skylight and they dropped down a rope and they would lasso people and pull them up when they walked by. It's a great image. So they did that. But one time they pulled somebody up and halfway up they realized it's the Rebbe. So they dropped him. So the Rishon very famously looked up at heaven and he said, Master of the universe, your children don't know how to treat this day. Take it away from them. And that was his
When did that stop?
lassoing people.
And the practical joke.
Oh, I don't know. It's funny. The Rishon lived, I mean, if this is a true story, which I don't know if it is. So the Rishon lived he was born in 1797, which means mostly his Hasidic work is happening in the early 1800s. That's pretty late already for Hasidim. Hasidut really begins in the 1770s. So I'm surprised, but I think it's true about Hasidut what we say, that the Amcha, the people, even those who couldn't study, felt included. And so, like, if you can't really, if you're a pious person, you're a simple person, and it's hard to relate to Tisha B'av. So so I don't know, the whole handstand thing. I was talking to a certain expert on Hasidut about this. I was like, what's with the handstands? Is this really is this some Kabbalistic thing? Is something else? He said, no, it's like young people that found their place in the Hasidic minyan because it was more fun. So they like to do handstands, and they would do it in the marketplace and do it here. There was shtick. That's what it was. If the Vilna Gaon's, followers would see shtick that we do, whatever, they'd probably be appalled. I mean, not at weddings. Weddings, they happened even in the Gemara, but I don't know. There was, I guess, it's maybe they still do it. I don't know, but I guess we don't do it anymore. But we also live at a time where there's great learning and great knowledge. I was thinking today as people were introducing Kinnos, I was remembering Kinnos when I was a kid. Now I grew up in a very little shul in a small town, and so there were not chachamim, but it's only in the last 50 years that there's education in America, Jewish education, basically. Before that, the average Jew didn't know anything. They certainly, they could read Hebrew, but in a million years, they couldn't have known what the Kinnos meant. And they certainly, the Kinnos are rife with references to Chazal and Tanakh. And you have to really be a Talmud Chacham. Before the internet, you have to be a Talmud Chacham to understand Kinnos. Now, partly it's what Judy said this morning, like you can look on the internet and you can figure out what Kinnos mean, and you can find all the connections between Kinnos and Chazal, and that's possible because of the internet. But I think also that people are very learned. When I was a kid, people said Kinnos, from what I remember. This may be different in Borough Park, but where I was in Connecticut, people said Kinnos. They sat on the floor and said Kinnos, but I don't think anybody knew what Kinnos meant. I assume the rabbi did, but the rabbi didn't explain it. And I don't think until Rabbi Soloveitchik started explaining all of Kinnos, people didn't. I think it's more recent that Kinnos get explained. They were said, and I don't think people really understood Kinnos. But this morning, as I was listening to our congregants talk on a deep level about Kinnos, I was like, this is a generation that can understand Kinnos. Like that's so. I think there were many. We have to remember that our experience of Judaism is not the experience people had 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago. So, but Hasidim did value joy. That's right. Ibdas Hashem b'simchas, to serve God with joy. And so I wouldn't say this was all the Hasidim, but, and the story may not, could be apocryphal, but it's certainly, I can't imagine them doing this on Yom Kippur. They would not think about that, right? They would not do this on Yom Kippur. Tisha B'av. In other words, pushing Tisha B'av aside is what to say for that. Putting Tisha B'av in a box and saying, the sadness of Tisha B'av, it's not really who we are. Like that's, I think, what's being expressed there. That's not really what Jews are, because we understand that that's not really how it's supposed to be. That is what it is, and we mourn. But within that is actually a great sense of joy. Because Tisha B'av is all about not Tisha B'av. Okay. All right, we should, next year, we should have not Tisha B'av, and it should indeed come true what's